So we were studying Amudei Hod, and we wanted to finish Siman Gimel in order to start Siman Daled, which is HeSeibah, and that's the next major theme of our Sivyos here in Arabic Pesachim, and that will take us to the Yotzer Yunim. So if you take a look on page Chaf Aleph, we're up to Os Beis, which is on the bottom right. And this is a study of the Girsa of the Rif and the Rambam. According to the Rif and the Rambam, what we have here on Daf Kuf Ches Amid Beis is Sheson Chai, Yidei Dalit Kosos Yotza, Yidei Cherus Lo Yotza. That's a whole different Girsa than our Girsa. And it indicates that once the wine is not areva olav, it's not tasty and pleasant because it's undiluted concentrated wine, then he forfeits the mitzvah of cherus. Sheson v'asachas, yidei cherus yotza. In other words, he's now drinking yayin mazug, so he does achieve cherus, but yidei daled kosos lo yotza. Now that seems to indicate that in B'vasachas, he forfeits the critical mitzvah of Daled Kosos. And he only gains like some sort of additional kiyum, which we call derech cherus, because he drank yayin mazuk. So the machaber of this sefer, Amudei Hod, suggests that we can interpret two different ways, two different alternative possibilities as to what B'vasachas means. We had already Rashi Shita that he poured 4 cups into one large kos, or we had Rabbeinu Peretz and others who said that he drank 4 cups consecutively. And it doesn't seem that from the Girsa of the Rambam and the Rif, we can really determine what exactly Sheson V'asachas is. However, if you take a look at the left column in the brackets, he says that the Rashbam and Tosfos and Rabbeinu David said that Vasachas means Shalo al Seder Haggadah. That's impossible in the Rambam, because the Rambam has not even mentioned the Seder Haggadah until Halacha Yud in Perek Zayin, meaning in Perek Zayin Halacha Tes, he introduces the case of Sheson V'asachas and Yidei Daled Kosos Lo Yotza, and yet it's not until Halacha Yud that the Rambam tells us that there's a chiyuv to be mevarech these following brachos al Seder Haggadah and drink the 4 cups. He hasn't even told us that. And that comes up in Halacha Yud. Kol kos me'arba kosa elu mevarech olav baracha b'fnei atzma v'kos rishon omer olav kiddush hayom kos sheni kori olav es haggadah kos shlishi mevarech olav berachas hamazon v'kos revi gomer olav es hahala. So how could it be that if the Rambam has not yet presented, one second, I want to take care of one little thing here. No, I don't know how to do that. Okay. If the Rambam has not yet presented that there is a seder in which we recite 4 brachos and drink 4 kosos, and he won't present that until we get to Halacha Yud, how is he expecting us to understand what he writes in Halacha Tes, that Sheson V'asachas, if we interpret it to mean Shalol Seder Haggadah? He hasn't yet presented to us the Seder Haggadah. And therefore, we're going to assume that the Rambam's interpretation of Vasachas, like that of Rabbeinu David, means that he drank them consecutively, but that has no connection with the Seder Haggadah. So what we need now is what we call kosos chalukos zumizu, and if he drinks 4 kosos consecutively without anything that separates one kos from the other, then we don't have kosos nifrados. We don't have separate kosos. And according to the Girs of the Rambam, it would seem that cherus becomes very crucial here. Because the Rambam has the girsa of either Yidei Cheres Yatza or Yidei Cheres Lo Yatza. So that seems to be a critical element here, Yidei Cheres. So he writes the following. This Firle, this is about 10 lines up from the bottom of the page. The Vidin Yayin, the Leil HaSeder, Amru Shnei Chiyuvim Shonim. With regard to the obligation of drinking wine, Chiyuv Echad has one obligation, L'shtoso Mazud. He's going to demonstrate Cheres by drinking tasty wine that's already been diluted. If Shesan Chai, all right, he fulfilled 4 separate kosos, nifrados, but since the wine is undiluted, he forfeits the kiyum of derech cheres. Now, if, according to the Rambam, derech cheres is so critical because the Gemara says in the case of Shesan Chai de cheres lo yatza, apparently lo yatza means that he has to drink again a second time, 4 cups, this time get it right, 4 cups of diluted wine. V'chein tzarich l'shtoso nifrados, im shesan b'masachas mezugos. So if he drinks 4 cups of wine without nifrados, because he drinks them one after the other, but they were mezugos, then yidei cheres yatza. But on the other hand, he's got to go back and fulfill the requirement of yidei kosos nifrados. So again, what does nifrados mean over here? So far, we know what it doesn't mean, but we don't know what it does mean. It doesn't mean Al Seder Agadah with all the different brachos. That the Rambam is only going to present later on in Halacha Yud. So here in Halacha Tes, Sheson Vasachas, which according to the Girs of the Rambam, Yedei Daled Kosos Lo Yotza, it's because he doesn't have 4 Kosos Nifrados. What would separate one kos from the other? If you go with Rashi, what would separate one kos from the other would actually be the fact that he has 4 physical kosos. But if he pours them all into one kos, then obviously he doesn't have 4 kosos nifrados, he doesn't have 4 separate kosos, and hence he forfeits the mitzvah of daled kosos. He can achieve the mitzvah of cherus insofar as the wine is muzzled. However, if we go with the other Rishonim, other than Rashi, and he drank actually 4 separate kosos, but he drank them one after the other, what would achieve the goal of daled kosos nifrados? What are we dealing with? Like, for example, if a person sells something and he wants to add a condition to the sale, so we give him up to Toch Kidei She'elas Rav L'Talmid, Shom Alecha Rebbe Yomori. We'll give him those few seconds to add a condition to the sale. Or maybe if he took a neder, to change his mind about the neder or the shvua. So what are we going to say? That he drank 4 cups, 4 separate kosos, one after the other, but each kos he drank toch kidei dibur. He finished the kos, he didn't let 3 seconds go by, and he drank the second kos. That's a bit strange. Now, we do have halacha in shesios mitztarfos. Like, for example, in solid foods, we have something called toch kidei achilas pras. And in shtios, we're going to have a tziruf in the time it would take to drink a revius. So whatever that shear is, it's 10 seconds, maybe it's a minute, maybe it's 2 minutes, whatever it is, he didn't let that time go by, and he already drank the second kos, etc., etc., etc. I was very surprised and a little bit disappointed that the Amudei Ho doesn't address this question. That if, according to the Rambam, he forfeits daled kosos because they weren't kosos nifrados, then what would create kosos nifrados? What would you have to do in order to circumvent the problem of the absence of kosos nifrados? What would be the positive way of setting up 4 separate kosos, that they're not mitzurah to one kos. If you go with Rashi, we understand 4 separate physical kosos. But if you don't have Rashi, but rather you go with all the other Rishonim, then there are 4 separate kosos. And yet the Rambam says, Lo yotzi de daled kosos. Because he drank them vasachas, meaning one after the other. But it can't be Seder HaGodim because the Rambam hasn't presented yet Seder HaGodim. But that question he doesn't address. Okay, we're now up to the Rosh, and that's on page Chaf Gimel. Chaf Beis. And we're basing ourselves on the Rosh in a Tshuva. So the gears of the Rosh is Sheson Chai, Yidei Dalit Kosos Yotzi, Yidei Cheres Lo Yotzi, Sheson Vas Achas, means Shaloch Seder HaGodah, is Yidei Yayin Yotza, Yidei Dalit Kosos Lo Yotzi. And the Rosh tells us in his tshuva that there are 2 obligations regarding drinking Dalit Kosos. The first obligation, which is the most fundamental obligation, is Dalit Kosos al Seder HaBrachos, meaning each one of the 4 kosos is a koshel bracha, and we recite a koshel bracha on yain, and that's what he has. He has a koshel yain for each one of the 4 brachos. And from that perspective, if we apply the universal standard of koshel bracha, then it's enough that one person would drink from amongst the entire group. He's got to drink from the kos. No one else has to drink. And we in fact saw such a thing in Tosas at the beginning of our Pesachim, with the word lo, that we only have to supply Dalit Kosos to one person. The Ritva, as we've mentioned many times in Brachos Perek Gimel, establishes this principle that with regard to a koshel bracha, we're all considered like guf echad. But now we have a second dimension to Dalit Kosos, and that's unique to Dalit Kosos, and that's the shtia of Dalit Kosos, without any connection to the brachos. So we have now an independent obligation to drink Dalit Kosos. And from that perspective, it's not enough that one person at the Seder table drank from the kos. Each person is required to physically implement his obligation of Shtiyas Dalit Kosos. So let's look at the girsa of the Rosh and try to fit this all into the text of the Rosh. It says, Sheson Chai, Yidei Dalit Kosos Yotza, but Yidei Cheres Lo Yotza. So what we're going to suggest now in the Rosh is that there are 3 different levels or 3 different dimensions to the mitzvah of Dalit Kosos. If he drank them Chai, then he fulfills 2 out of the 3 of those dimensions. Number 1, he did the Shtiyas Yayin, even though it was Chai. He, number 2, had the Amiras HaBrach Al HaKos. But number 3, the Cheres, to demonstrate that he's a Ben Chorim, that he forfeits because he drank Yain Chai. Sheson Vasachas, we're going to say that he didn't fulfill 2 out of the 3 obligations. He drank Yain Mazug, and therefore he fulfilled the mitzvah of Derech Cherus. However, he did not fulfill the mitzvah of Amir Al HaKos because he drank them consecutively. And he did not fulfill the mitzvah of separate kosos, equaling the number 4, which is Keneged the Dal Lishonos of Geula. So all he has is the Derech Cherus of drinking Yayin Mazuk. And again, we're going to have to see how HeSeibah fits into this. That's our next major undertaking. Rabbeinu Peretz has the identical girsa in the Gemara as the Rosh, but with a different take, a different interpretation. When it says Sheson Chai Yidei Dal Kosas Yotzi Yidei Cheres Lo Yotza, he introduces the element of Simchas Yontif. We cannot forget this, Rabbeinu Peretz. So in other words, when it says Sheson Chai Yotzi Yidei Dal Kosos, it means that he was Mekayim the din of Simchas Yontif by drinking 4 kosos. Yidei Cheres Lo Yotza, because he drank them chai. So he forfeits a hidur mitzvah, an extra embellishment of the mitzvah, namely to drink yayin mazu. And now he says that if we take the impetus, the initiative of the Rabbeinu Peretz to introduce Simcha into the equation, and the entire sugya therefore deals with that mitzvah of drinking yayin for Simchas Yontif, but a unique mitzvah of Simchas Yontif that's cloned, or shall we say, grafted into the structure of Daled Kosos and the mitzvah of Daled Kosos. And so, in the case of Sheson Chai, does he fulfill the mitzvah of Simchas Yontif? And the answer is yes. He forfeits Cherus, but he does have Simchas Yontif. And here, the Amudei Hod vacillates on the following question. In the case of Sheson Chai, which according to the Girsa of Rabbeinu Peretz, is Yidei Daled Kosos Yotza, it means that he has achieved the bare bones, fundamental, critical mitzvah of Daled Kosos because he drank 4 kosos, but he forfeits a hidur mitzvah, and that is derech cherus, because he did not dilute the wine. So that means that Yidei Daled Kosos Yotza, in the case of Sheson Chai, means he has fulfilled the basic mitzvah of Shtias Daled Kosos, albeit without the extra enhancement of Derech Cherus. Now we get to Sheson Vasachas. Once again, we're going to talk about the mitzvah of Simchas Yontif. But what's the connection between the Vasachas and Simchas Yontif? No connection whatsoever. So therefore, Sheson Vasachas, where it says Yidei Yayin Yotza, what does that mean, Yidei Yayin? What does it mean, Cherus? I mean, we haven't even mentioned Cherus. So he writes that Yitochen, perhaps, the Achar Shapirish Sabbav, the Sheson Vasachas, the Yidei Daled Kosos Lo Yotza, Hainu de Lo Yotza Midin Simchas Yontiv, that in the case of a Vasachas, he forfeits Simchas Yontiv because Simchas Yontiv has to be 4 separate kosos, and he only has 1 out of the 4, so he only has a segment. Then we can go back to the Reisha in the case of Sheson Chai, and we can say that Yidei Yayin, Yidei Daled Kosos Yotza is a reference to the Yayin of Simcha, of Simchas Yontiv. So he has fulfilled the Simchas Yontiv of Daled Kosos, but he forfeits the kiyum of Cherus because he drank it Chai. In the case of Vasachas, Yidei Daled Kosos Lo Yotza means he doesn't have Simchas Yontiv because he didn't separate between one kos and the other. And the mitzvah of Simchas Yontiv on Leil HaPesach can only be fulfilled through 4 separate kossos of yayin that he drank. But he doesn't have 4 separate kosos, and therefore he forfeits Simchas Yontiv. So the entire sugya, according to Rabbeinu Peretz, revolves around Simchas Yontiv. So Sheson Vasachas Yidei Yayin Yotza, But Yidei Daled Kosos Lo Yotza means Yidei Simcha of Yantiv. He did not fulfill because Rabbanan made that takana that he should only be able to fulfill Simchas Yantiv through the kiyum of the mitzvah Daled Kosos. And he drank all 4 kosos vas achas, therefore he doesn't have Daled Kosos, he has only one of the 4. Now, Rabbeinu Peretz offers of the Ode a slightly different approach to this sugya, and Rabbeinu Peretz says that Kevan shekasher shosa daled kosos vas achas kiyam al kol mitzvahs kos achas. He has at least one of the 4 kosos, so he has a simchas yontiv that's attached to the kiyam mitzvah of 1 kos of the 4, and that will give him. He will achieve a kiyam of simchas yontiv with regard to one of the 4. But that's not the Hider mitzvah, because the Hider mitzvah is that the Shtiyas Yain of Simchas Yontiv should be experienced through 4 kosos. And he only has 1 out of the 4 kosos. And now we have the Meiri. This is on page Chaf Gimel. According to the Girs of the Meiri, Sheson Chai Yidei Yayin Yotza. We don't have that in our text. We have Yidei Arba Kosos Yotza. So what's Yidei Yayin Yotza? Even though it's Yayin Chai. Okay, Yidei Cheres Lo Yotza, that we know. Sheson Vas Achas, Yidei Cheres Yotza, Yidei Daled Kosos Lo Yotza. And the Amudei Hod points out that the Girsa, the text of the Gemara, according to the Meiri, is a combination of Rashi's Girsa and the Rambam's Girsa. So let's see the Meiri. Sheson Chai Yidei Yayin Yotza, Hainu Mitzvahs Daled Kosos. So we're interpreting according to the Meiri, Sheson Chai, when it says in the Meiri's Girsa, Yidei Yayin Yotza, it means exactly as it says in our Girsa, Yidei Daled Kosos Yotza. So what didn't he fulfill? He's missing that extra kiyum, that enhancement, that Hidur mitzvah of Yidei Cheres. Lo Yotza Yidei Cheres, because he drank in Chai. Shson Vas Achas, Yidei Cheres Yotza, because he drank Yayin Mozu. V'lo Yotza Yidei Chovas Daled Kosos. Ella Yotza Yidei Chovas Kos Achas. But again, we're not talking about the Kos Achas that we had in Rabbeinu Peretz of Simchas Yontif. The Meiri doesn't have Simchas Yontif on his radar screen, but rather from the 4 kosos, he only fulfilled 1 out of the 4. He's going to have to drink another set of 3 kosos to be mashlim the 1 kos that he drank. So how is it that he achieved Yidei Cheres Yotza if he only drank 1 kos? The answer is that Yidei Cheres you can fulfill with 1 kos. Daled kosos requires what? 4. And since he drank Vas Achas, it's considered as if he drank 1, and he's missing 3. But as far as Cheres is concerned, the Meiri's Chiddush is that he can obtain the mitzvah of Cheres through 1 kos. So now we're going to analyze the Girsa based on the Meiri. In the section that deals with Chai, the language that he's using for Daled Kosos is Yayin. Right? When it says in the Meiri's Girsa, Shosan Chai Yidei Yayin Yotza, so we're talking about the mitzvah Daled Kosos. But oddly enough, instead of Daled Kosos, he calls it yayin, yidei yayin yotza. Then when you get to Shson Vasachas, and he wants to point out that he didn't fulfill the mitzvah of Daled Kosos, it says yidei Daled Kosos lo yotza, which means that you have to drink 4 kosos and not just 1 kos. He only drank the equivalence of 1 kos. So again, this is a problem. Well, let's see if we can calculate the problem here. What is bothering us about the Girsa of the Meiri? In the case of Shon Chai, the Girsa of the Meiri is that Yidei Yayin Yotza, and he really means Yidei Daled Kosos Yotza. That's a little bit odd. Why does he say Yidei? Why does the Gemara say Yidei Yayin Yotza? And in the case of Shison Vasachas, he says that Yidei Daled Kosos Yotza, Lo Yotza, and we're shifting here. Until now, we said Yidei Yayin Yotza. Now we're shifting to Yidei Daled Kosos Yotza, or in the case of Shison Vasachas, Lo Yotza. So what is the focal point here? Is the focal point here on Siyas Yayin, or is on the Shi of Daled Kosos? And in the Meiri's Girsa, it's like a stira from the Reisha to the Seifa. In the Reisha, we seem to be focused on Yayin, and in the Seifa, we're focused on Daled Kosos, 4 separate kosos. Number 2, we have a second problem in the Meiri. In the case of Shison Chai, the Meiri writes that Lo Yotza means Lo Yotzi de Cheres, which is only a Heder mitzvah. But in the case of Shison Vasachas, where it says Yidei Daled Kosos Lo Yotza, means he didn't fulfill the mitzvah at all, the basic critical mitzvah. He only drank 1 out of the 4 kosos. So again, there's a very strange, disconnect, if I can use that word, between the language of the Reish and the language of the Sefer. Rabbeinu David, on the other hand, again having the same exact Girsa as the Meiri, he interprets it differently. That the root and the essence of the Chiyuv of Daled Kosos is to drink 4 separate kosos. And only as a Heder mitzvah, you should drink them mazug once they're already diluted. Shison Chai, he forfeits that extra kiyum, that Heder mitzvah of mazug, and therefore Yidei Yayin Yotza, and the word Yayin means Daled Kosos, Yidei Cheres Lo Yotza. So again, it would seem that according to Rabbeinu David, in the case of Shison Chai, he only forfeits a Heder mitzvah of Yidei Cheres. But as far as Daled Kosos are concerned, he fulfilled the basic mitzvah of Daled Kosos. But in the case of Shison Vasachas, Yidei Cheres Yotza, Yidei Daled Kosos Lo Yotza, here now he drinks Yayin Mazun, so he fulfills and obtains the kiyum of Cheres. So what does it mean that Yidei Cheres Yotza? It means that he's Mekayim the mitzvah of Daled Kosos Behidur. So then it says Yidei Daled Kosos Lo Yotza. So basically what's happening now, according to Rabbeinu Peretz, is that the Heder mitzvah can be achieved in 2 ways. Number 1, through Yayin Mazug, and number 2, through Kosos Nifrados. And each kos had its own bracha. So in the case of Yayin Chai, he forfeits Yidei Cheres because he didn't drink Yayin Mazug. In the case of Shison Vasachas, he forfeits that extra kiyum of Cheres because he doesn't have the 4 brachos on the 4 kosos. But it all comes down to this kiyum of Cheres. He says now the Girsa Rabbeinu David is a very advantageous and attractive girsa, because in both cases of Yayin Chai and Bevasachas, Yotza means he has fulfilled his basic chiyuv. Lo Yotza means he did not fulfill his hidur mitzvah. That's a great advantage of Rabbeinu David. Aval adayin dochuk, we still have a problem. Nobody gets away without a problem. The Rebava, the Shason Chai, in the case where he drank undiluted wine, is kama yidei yayin yotza. So what is the basic chiyuv of Daled Kosos? It's yayin. And even if he drank chai, that's considered yayin, and therefore he was mekayim the chiyuv of yayin. But when we get to Shason Vasachas, and it says yidei cherus yotza, that's the ikar chiyuv of cherus that has in it that hidur of cherus. But how can you have a hidur of cherus when yidei daled kosos lo yotza? Havi le'lememer b'bava de shason chai ki ein zeh dahainu dahavi le'lememer yidei daled kosos yotza. He should have pointed out that in the case of Yain Chai, he fulfills the basic mitzvah of Daled Kosos. Because again, he just forfeits the hidur of cherus. Now we get to the case of Shason B'Vasachas, which according to Rabbeinu David means Shalol Seder Agada. And now all of a sudden, the language of the Gemara is Yidei Daled Kosos Lo Yotza, which means what? He doesn't have the hidur mitzvah of Seder Agada according to Rabbeinu David. Well, why do you say Yidei Daled Kosos Lo Yotza? I mean, in the case of Chai, you said that he forfeits that extra hidur kiyum of Yidei Cherus. But in the case of Daled Kosos, you're telling me of Shason Vasachas, you're telling me Daled Kosos Lo Yotza. That sounds like he forfeits the very fundamental kiyum, and he's not fulfilled his obligation of Daled Kosos, which is not true according to Rabbeinu David. Because even if he drinks the 4 cups without the Seder Agada, he has basically fulfilled his mitzvah of Daled Kosos. So what are you telling me? Yidei Daled Kosos Lo Yotza. Anyway, he calculates at the end. This is like the Gemara in Yuma about how many kiddushim the Kohen Gadol undergoes during Yom Kippurim, and how many times does he have to wash his feet in the kiyar, and how many times does he have to say vidui? V'nimtzu sacha kol daled girsos v'zayin pirushim. There's girsas Rashi, which lends itself to 3 different interpretations. There's a girsa the Rif of the Rambam, and a girsa of Rosh, which has also 2 pirushim. On top of that, you have the girsa of the Iri and Rabbeinu David. Okay. Now this leads us to the din of HeSeibah. Okay then, so what we're going to do now is we're going to open up the Gemara, and I think you have also the Yotzer Yunim, but first we'll start with the Gemara itself. So this is an introduction to the next major sugya. Okay. The Mishnah had told us at the beginning of our Pesachim, Afilu Ani Shebisrol Yochal Ad Sheyeseh. It doesn't say Ad Sheyishteh, that the Ani has to drink 4 kos. It says Ad Sheyeseh. Itma. So let's take a look now at the Gemara on Daf Kuf Ches Omer Aleph. And again, in my text of the Gemara, you'll see on the right side it says Rashbam, which is about 1/3 down from the top of the Amud. And one line above that, after quoting the Mishnah of Afilu Onisha B'Yisrael Yelchal Ad Sheyesev Itmar, Matzah Sarech HeSeibah. When you eat matzah on the night of the Seder, you're required to incline on the left side, Kiderech B'nei Chorin, because the matzah is what we call Zecher L'Geulas Mitzrayim. Marar ain't Sarech HeSeibah. Marar is not Zecher L'Yitzias Mitzrayim, but rather Zecher L'Avdus. And therefore, it doesn't require HeSeibah. However, it seems from the Gemara that if he wants to eat the Mara HeSeibah, then no problem. He doesn't have to do so, it's no requirement, but he can decide to eat the Mara HeSeibah. However, the Magen Avram writes that L'chatchila ein lahasiv. He should not eat the Mara HeSeibah. And this is the Magen Avram. We should make a note of it in Siman Taf Ayin Hey, 475. You can remember that number, 475. Now, do you see a Tosfos that starts with the word my? It's 1, 2, 3, 4 Tosfos, the 4 Tosfos on the page. The Afal Gav de Matzah Tzricha HeSeibah, Tosfos raises the following question. We just finished establishing that matzah requires HeSeibah. And the question is, my dahava hava, which means the following. He already recited the Haggadah. He finishes Gal Yisrael, completing Magid, and then he eats the matzah. So why don't we ask the same question? You're requiring HeSeibah during matzah in order to demonstrate this entire Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim of Cherus, but he's already fulfilled the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, and it's already over. Why then should matzah, which comes after the entire reading of Magid, why should it require HeSeibah? Shani matzah, she ikar su'uda yoser miyayin. All right, this I don't understand. But Tosfos establishes that the Ikar Suda is matzah. And then he writes the Ode, the Yayin Hesiv Kfar B'Shnei Kos Rishonos. What's going on over here? Let me just look here. You have the Masechet, right? If you take a look, we have Bi'urei HaTosfos here. Let me just see if he adds. I think we're missing a word or two. I'm sorry it's taking me so long, but until you find the right page here. Here it's on page Chav Ches, and he writes the following. He says, Shebiyayin Hesev Kvar B'Shnei Kosos Harishonim. The Gemara's problem, called My Da'ava Hava, which we'll get to in Mirza Hashem soon, only applies to Dalit Kosos because he's already achieved HeSeibah in the first two kosos. So why in the second set of two kosos, beginning with Birkas Hamazon, are you going to require HeSeibah? So he says the following. Let me just see who he's quoting here. Sama. I don't know. I'm not sure who he's quoting. He says the following. Kishem shelo chivu lechol es kol hasuuda b'Heseiba. El raka kezayis matzah rishona. And why is that? Shehi ikar hasuuda. Ve'amatzah she'ochel b'nosaf lekezayis rishona. Edo chayev b'Heseiba. Kach, gam lo chivu lahasiv b'shtias arba kosos el b'shtea kos rishonos. Sha'oz asukim be'inyan hageula. There's a very strange equation here in Tosfos, in the V'od in Tosfos. Tosfos is making an equation between the fact that after you ate the first kizayis matzah, you no longer require HeSeibah, and the fact that after you drank the first two kosos, you no longer need HeSeibah. Now again, it could be that what Tosfos has in mind is that HeSeibah has to coincide with the mitzvah of Sipra Geula. So in the first two kosos, culminating with Gal Yisrael, in the case of the second kos, he's Osek Be'inyan Geula, and therefore HeSeibah is appropriate, as opposed to the last two kosos, after he's already fulfilled the mitzvah of Sipitis Mitzrayim. We once had a discussion about that. Then there's no need for HeSeibah. In matzah, we have the same thing. The first kizayis matzah is integrated into the Sipitis Mitzrayim. Once we finish that kizayis matzah and fulfill the mitzvah matzah, we're now on to Seudah. And we will eat matzah within the context of the Seudah, and we're not going to require HeSeibah. Why? Because it's only the first matzah, the kizayis matzah barishona, that's integrated into the fabric of Sipitis Mitzrayim. All the subsequent achilos of matzah are part of the Seudah. They're not part of Sipitis Mitzrayim, and therefore they don't require HeSeibah. The Ode, Suva B'Torah Zeichel Lecherus, Shlo Hispik B'Tzekel Lahachmitz Ad Shen Nigalu. What's that all about? The Masha Omer the Kizais Matzah Tzricha HeSeibah is not because of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, because that he's already achieved before he gets to eat the first Kizais of Matzah. But rather, Ksuv Torah, Zecher L'Cheres. The Torah has defined the essence of matzah as derech cheres, and we'll see that in the pasuk. So we don't need Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim to set up the matzah as a kiyum of cheres, because the matzah itself inherently and essentially is derech cheres. Shlo hispik v'tzeikam lachmitz ad shenigalu. The pasuk says that the reason why we're eating matzah is because that's all they ate until the geula. Lo hispik v'tzeikam lachmitz. So again, just to summarize, we have here an issue regarding matzah where the Gemara says that matzah needs HeSeibah, and we're wondering why matzah needs HeSeibah. And apparently, Tosfos vacillates as to whether or not matzah is part and parcel of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, like the Shtei Kossos or Rishonos, and just like the first two Kossos require HeSeibah, so too matzah requires HeSeibah, or alternatively, matzah requires HeSeibah independent of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, simply because the matzah per se is Zecher L'Cheres. That's the second and third answer of Tosfos. The first answer of Tosfos is that Iker Seudah, that matzah is the Iker Seudah, the first Kizayis. But again, what is the connection between HeSeibah and Iker Seudah? There's an unbelievable chiddush here in the first answer of Tosfos, if I understand it correctly, that the Seudah itself is part of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. And what sets up that Seudah as having the personality of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim? It's the fact that I'm koveya the Seudah on matzah, and I ate that matzah HeSeibah. So the HeSeibah impacts on the Achilas Matzah that sets up the Seudah and upgrades that Achilas Matzah to a level of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. And that means that the Seudah now can be incorporated into the framework of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. Again, I don't understand why this is so. I mean, I'm very excited about it because in the Simanim, we have Shulchan Aruch, which is a little out of place. I always wondered why Shulchan Aruch was on the Simanim. The Simanim are all indicative of the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. Why is Seudah, meaning Shulchan Aruch, on that list? But now we're saying that the Shulchan Aruch itself is integrated into the very fabric of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. And how do I achieve that goal? I'm just eating a Seudah. What makes it into an upgraded Seudah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim? It's the fact that I was koveya Seudah on matzah and I ate the matzah HeSeibah. Now, let's say, for example, he ate the matzah without HeSeibah. So now he's in the middle of his Seudah. According to the first answer of Tosfos, we would not require HeSeibah because it's only HeSeibah in the matzah that set up the Seudah, which is the first Kizayis. According to the other answer, Tosfos, that matzah is al shem shelo hispiku b'tzekom lahachmitz, meaning that there's an inherent kiyum of zechiras cherus in the eating of the matzah, then he's got to somehow attach HeSeibah to the matzah, whether it's the first matzah or the second matzah. My only problem is the middle answer, Kos. I don't know exactly what he's saying again. Let's go over it one more time. Should be Yayin Hesiv Kvar B'Shtei Kosos Harishonos. I don't know what he means here. I don't know what he means by this V'od. V'od V'yayin Hesiv Kvar B'Shtei Kosos Harishonos. Okay, but how does that answer Tosfos' question? Why does the matzah require a HeSeibah? In the first answer, he said, it requires a HeSeibah. Why? Because we said that who ikar seuda, he's conveying the seuda on matzah. Well, what's the v'od now? The third answer is because matzah itself is zeichel l'cherus. But somewhere in the middle of this, he wedges in this answer. Not sure. He's basically saying that the principle of Maida Havahava operates within the framework of one continuous mitzvah. If he drank the first two kosas of Yayin HeSeibah, there's no need to require HeSeibah in the second set of two kosas, meaning the third and the fourth kosas. But he doesn't tell you why the matzah requires HeSeibah. And it's after the secret use Mitzrayim. So the first answer he says because he's kover the Suda. The third answer he says because matzah inherently has to become zeichel l'cherus. But what was the middle answer? He just tells you that it's not similar to the case of Dalet Kosos, but it doesn't tell you why we require a HeSeibah. He's just saying don't equate it with Dalet Kosos, where we drop the requirement of a HeSeibah in the second set of two Kosos. This I can't answer. I don't know what that middle v'od is adding over. Okay, Rabbosai, so this is what we wanted to accomplish here as an introduction to the sugya of HeSeibah. Let's see if we can make a note of where we got up to on Daf Kuf Ches Omid Aleph. Okay, then I just need some to put a thing over here. And then on page Pei Gimel here of Otzer Ayunim, we have Mareches Nun Tes Mitzvah HeSeibah. But again, I think we'll go through this Marocha after we do more of the Sugyas HaGemara with Rashi and Tosfos, Rashbam and Tosfos. Now, for the next year,